God, we practice so many times at home, and standing in front of you is just kind of like shaking. Anyway, so today's memory verse is from John 17, 13 through 19. This is a prayer that Jesus said for his disciples before he was crucified. Okay? Now I am coming to you. I told them many things while I was with them in this world, so that they would be filled with my joy. I have given them your word, and the world hates them because they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. I am not asking you to take them out of the world, but to keep them safe from the evil one. They do not belong to this world any more than I do. Keep them holy by your truth. Teach them your word, which is truth. Just as you sent them into the world, I am sending them into the world. And I give myself as a holy sacrifice for them, so they can be made holy by your truth.
This is good stuff. I was hoping you were going to do a yellow card, because then I had that, it's like, do I say that when I get up front? And I was going to say it. So I'm glad, though, you made it official from your end. Good stuff. Good stuff. Pat family, Young, thank you for reading. Thank you for sharing. Again, we're just seeing the Word of God speak. We hear it through different voices. Now, there's verses that whenever they read those verses again, I don't remember this time, but they've thought about that every time they've gone over it in the past X number of weeks and learning that. And they can do it, you can do it. Keep bringing more and more of God into your lives and hear it through those things. But again, thank you for, it looks different up here when they're all looking at you. Yeah, that's why I pray before I leave the pew. From the back of the heads is one thing. It's a good group. We've been looking at the Ten Commandments, thinking of them as 10 words. The seventh command, where we're at today in one word, is pure. Thinking of purity. You can read it in Exodus 20 along with the other commandments. This one reads in verse 14, you shall not commit adultery. Another one, they're very simple. And what they say, it just takes a few words for God to convey what he wanted to. You shall not commit adultery. And this one addresses actions that we usually don't talk about in mixed company, if we even talk about it at all. But think about it this morning. Is it out of place? Well, let's think where we've been again. Consider the last 6 times that we've spent time on this. First of all, we had one, follow the one God. We had worship, only worship God. Identity, use his name very carefully. Remember, resting and remembering, thinking about God and what he's done. Obey, show others as worthy, especially parents. And then last time we talked about valued, finding out and being reminded that life is valuable. The seventh command is not out of place. It continues to teach right along with the others. Altogether, when you take them as a whole, you find out that God is interested in every aspect of your life. Every aspect. And he's interested in every aspect of the lives of other people. Hence, we're still talking about it. You shall not commit adultery. And this command leads to a question and then our answer to it. I haven't, have I? Like the commandment last time, don't murder. We can move over this one pretty quickly. We have. Because it's not something that many would say they've done. While recognizing that they haven't been a perfect husband or wife, they know they've made it a point to come back home every night. You might also say you're single or widowed or divorced, and therefore it's not really applicable. So then, is the commandment just for a few of us then, or is it for all of us? Well, I want us to begin with Jesus again. The first few times that we looked at things, we talked about them and then we ended up at Jesus. Again, as last time, I want to start with Jesus and then roll back to Moses. And why do it? Because Jesus saw value in the law that Moses gave. Even by the time of Jesus, it was old, but he still saw value in it, and I want us to see how he saw it and what he did with it first. Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. Jesus knew God was sharing the reality of living in covenant with him, what it is to live in this type of relationship with God. So listen to what Jesus would say about something spoken even long before him. So Matthew chapter 5, I will start reading in verse 17. Verse 17. Matthew 5, and verse 17. Jesus says, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." These laws, and we can just think of the first few books of the Bible and all that's in there, these laws, this covenant between God and people, it mattered to Jesus. This covenant mattered to Jesus. See, to heaven, all people have value. Say that with me again. To heaven, all people have value. One more time. To heaven, all people have value. God valued people in Exodus. And then here we see Jesus voicing that value in Matthew, and we'll hear more of it. And God's values have not changed. So if this is true, then this commandment and all the other ones matter to Jesus too. You shall not commit adultery. Well, what did Jesus say about this short little command? Well, keep listening. Verse 21. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raca,' is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you won't get out until you've paid the last penny." Jesus is on to something that we forget when we read the Ten Commandments. Notice that right relationships matter before personal feelings. Right relationships matter before personal feelings. Also notice that others must come before self. Not the only place that Jesus does this or illustrates it, but others come before self. But he still hasn't talked about adultery yet, so we'll listen a little bit more. Verse 27. "You've heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And once again, we can follow the letter of the law, "Do not commit adultery," but miss the meaning of the law. The meaning, your thoughts, which lead to your actions, they matter to God. What you allow to go on inside of you is just as important as what goes on outside of you. Your thoughts matter as much as your actions. Jesus explains it. Just as anger or hate is linked to murder, so Jesus helps us see that lust is linked to adultery. It's not just the action, the letter of the law, it's the thought and the meaning, the purpose of the law. If he or she that you're looking at or thinking about, if they're not your husband or your wife, they shouldn't be in your bed. Not even in your mind, Jesus says. She may just be on your phone screen, but in your mind and in God's eyes, she's in your bed. And there's that guy that's on the other end of the room, but if he's somewhere else in your mind, Jesus says God knows it. Leviticus 20. You don't have to turn there. I want us to think about it. Turn there before the day's over, if you will. It spells out much more than I can spell out from up here this morning. Read Leviticus 20, you'll find out why. It's spoken at Mount Sinai, the same place we're at when we read from Exodus. The people are still there. The words were spoken in the same time, roughly about the same 11 months as the time that they're in that spot as we read these 10 commandments in Exodus. The name Leviticus means Levitical, that which concerns the priests. The priests were in God's service, chosen by God. They were descended from Levi, so again, that kind of helps us see where the name comes from. Leviticus is best understood when you know that the word that's used so often are the forms of the word. 120 times, more than 120 times, this word holy comes up. Not just once, not just a couple of times, not in this paragraph, and just 120 times. Holy, 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 holiness, holy, on and on and on. It's at this mountain, Mount Sinai, that the people will learn about holy worship, and they're going to learn about a holy God. A holy God that speaks to a holy people about how to worship that holy God and then how to live in holy ways. That's what's going on there at the mountain. That's what's going on in the 10 Commandments. That's what's going on in the whole law. That's really what's going on in the whole Bible. Leviticus uses the covenant as a means to explain what is holy and what isn't. And it's good. We can think, oh, it's just so detailed. Exactly. Because we find out that God is interested in every single aspect of our lives. Leviticus is a part of that covenant. It makes clear what's right or wrong in God's eyes, especially as He speaks to and about the priests and about all of the people, which we ended up talking about this morning in the class in here and finding out. Peter helps us see it a little bit later on in the Bible. We're all priests. Remember, the people who heard these words for the first time, those gathered at the foot of the mountain, they'd grown up in another country, in another nation. This is not what they had known. They know about what it was like back there. God's telling them, this is what it's like out here and where you're going. This is how you'll be my people. Freed by God, they're learning now that this is how He said life should be lived. Forget what you've known. This is how I want you to live as my people. The specific part of Leviticus, it gives the people an understanding of what God has designed the body to be able to do and be able to enjoy in terms of intimacy. We see it through a bunch of don'ts. God wants to make it very clear. These are things you won't do. These are things that are not acceptable. Primarily, it's something that's to be enjoyed in the context of marriage, husband and wife. That man and that woman are the recipients of God's plan for marriage. And any change from that is to use the relationship not as God designed it to be, as God designed it to be. We're blessed to be able to read what He created. We can pick up on that as soon as we open our Bibles up. We're blessed to be able to read how He created it, what it's for, and then we also find out what He thinks of any changes we might want to make to it. Purity, in one word. And in a few more words, He says, you shall not commit adultery. But this command is about more than marriage. It's about purity. Pure. Because our God is. What about single people and widowed people? If the person that's thought about or longed for is married, adultery's still the word. Because having someone in your bed who isn't yours, even if only in your mind, is still the action. But he or she is single and so am I. then marriage is the context, and it's also the time and the place by God's design. It's not easy. It defies our emotions. This certainly is not what TV is portraying at all. It's not what our songs are singing about. But it is what God says. It's what God says. And those early commandments reminded us what's special about Him. When we short-circuit God's ways, we're bound to be in for a shock. So what do you do when your mind is going in that direction, though? What do you do when you see him or when you see her? Listen as we keep reading from Jesus in Matthew 5. Let's go on to verse 29. Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Is He looking for maimed people? No. He, like God, is looking for holy people. He says there's a time for some gouging and some cutting. It may be cutting the cable TV package. It may be cutting the data package. It may be gouging the line to the router. It may be gouging the subscription. It might be that we cut the office. It might be that we cut the job. Sever the relationship for the sake of purity. Better to lose TV or the phone or the computer or even the job than to find those things and then to be found somewhere else, as Jesus talks. Remember, it's not about how close we can get to the line and not cross it. It's about staying away from the line altogether. Where it gets even more complicated is when divorce enters the conversation. I know, why do I say that? Listen one last time and we'll be done reading in Matthew 5. Verse 31. It's been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality, interesting note, another word we'll bring into play here. The Greek word there is where we get our word pornography. The word is porneia. It's interesting that comes into play too. It fits our conversation. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Wow, it just got really complicated. What counts then for immorality? What else should qualify for a divorce? Say that again about marrying someone who's divorced. And then God's original words were, you shall not commit adultery. And we've introduced so much into God's way of living over the generations, over the chapters as we continue to read from Leviticus on, and our lives, so much. We've complicated our minds and our lives and our relationships, our community, if you will. So keep studying these issues along with me. Keep applying what you hear and what you read. Apply it to your own life. But know this, right relationships matter more than personal feelings. And know that others must come before self. That's what Jesus is talking about. And practicing those may solve most of our dilemmas. So with that, commit yourself to purity. Commit yourself to not committing adultery will go a long way in your honoring of God and your honoring of family and your honoring of others. I wanted to continue to make this commandment real this morning. I've asked Paul, if he will, to join me up front this morning, and just want to pose some questions to Paul. I'm interested to hear in his answers, and I want you to hear them as well. So Paul, if you'll just join me up here. I thought we'll set up here because it's a little bit higher, otherwise everybody will be moving around trying to see. And I'll make sure they can hear you. Yeah, good. All right, there's a lot of people I could have chosen, but when I thought about this topic, I thought about you. Now, But I thought about you because of what you do for a living. So I know some know, but I know some don't know. So fill them in a little bit on what you do. You don't have to say company name or anything, but you can just say what you do, unless you want to put in an advertisement.
It doesn't matter. I work for Peterbilt Motors. I work for Packard Parts. We supply the parts for the trucks that go down the road. My dealers are located all in the Northeast and through New England. I've got 25 different dealers. So my average week is 4 days out on the road and come home on Friday. So my time away from home outweighs the time that I'm at home.
Right. And even today after the elders meeting, we're talking about, there's things we just want to continue the conversation on. Mark's question to you was, so are you out this week? And your answer, yes. Yeah. So out, so during that time, now this would be a given, but you're not sleeping at home every night, so where do you find yourselves in all of these off times? Where
Motel rooms and restaurants.
Yeah, not sleeping in the restaurant, I hope.
It's been closed right now.
Yeah. All right. What have you done, thinking about what we've talked about this morning, what have you done so you don't cross the line on trips?
It's pretty simple. When we got married, I made a commitment. So I honor that commitment. So if you want to find it, it's there.
Right.
But you realize my life is at home, and I'm going to act the same way on the road as I would at home.
Right. And even as I ask you the questions, I'm thinking, Jackie, I mean, it's not a one person, and as we've talked about too, I mean, it's and then a family as well. It's not just Jackie, it's the girls and all those boys.
Women in my life. I don't need a fifth.
There we go. Note made to the. What advice would you give to people who, and hearing what we're talking about this morning, there's an element of it where it seems easy, and there's another element it's like that is very difficult, although it sounds easy. What advice would you give to the person who's battling this? Maybe it's the person who's on the road, but maybe it's the person who never leaves home for that kind of situation. What advice would you hand off based on experience?
I just think you know what's right and what's wrong. And if you are married and you've made that commitment, you made it to your wife and to God.
Good.
So the idea is not hard. Are there temptations at times? Sure. Because I can tell you there's no lonelier time than when you sit down to eat, which the table in our house is important, and there are 5 or 6 people missing.
Right.
So the biggest thing that I just say is that you know what's right, you know what's wrong, and just like he said, poke out your eye. If that's something that bothers you, then, or there's a problem, then you got to stay away from it.
Okay, good. As a shepherd here in this place, as one of our elders, which is this conversation's nice because of who you are here. What would you relay to when we think about sheep, and we mean that in a good way, but Jesus uses that terminology. As you think about the sheep here, and as a shepherd here, what would you pass along as wisdom? I mean, this is our church family, and it represents also those who aren't here. Kind of in that same line, what would you pass along? What would be your word in light of what we've talked about this morning?
I think that the idea of reading sounds simple, but I think that if you're starting to have that issue or that problem, then you need to read. I also would hope that if there's anybody here that is struggling with something like that, that they would come to us and be able to want to share that with us and see what we can do to try to help and to be there for them. Don't fight it all on your own if you have a weakness. See what we can do to try to help.
Good. Thanks, Paul. Give Paul a hand if you will. Thanks, Paul. You just leave it there. Yeah, you take it with you. I'm good either way. Good. Thank you. And I didn't. Paul set me up without us planning to do this. I'm just going to take what he said. Listen now to the words of David. David's king over God's people. We know him as that for a time. We also know him as the young man David, the guy who killed Goliath. And this is the VBS stuff. But he also shared a bed with another man's wife. That one doesn't make the VBS stories. Maybe it should sometimes. Maybe those are the things we need to be reminded of. Be an interesting VBS, wouldn't it? David was caught, he was confronted, and the child that resulted died. David wrote these words. We know these words not just because they're recorded in the Bible, we know them because they're part of a song. This song was sung. This community of people that we're talking about, this is one of the songs that they sang. These are the words to that song. It's Psalm 51. We'll just read part of it. But this is not just recorded in Scripture. It was sung at different times by this community of believers. And David and I, we were talking about the worship this morning, and as you try to offer, this is where I'm going with the sermon. Here's some possible songs. I said there's not this topic. There's not a song. I don't remember how I worded it. Thou shalt sleep in thine own bed. There's not, that song doesn't exist. But as he said, a lot of the songs like Faithful Love, these tie back into it. Then I said, there's a lot of country songs we could have sung this morning. It might not have been quite the right take, but it shows it gets out there. But here's a song that we have in the Bible about what we're talking about this morning. Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin, for I know my transgressions and my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what's evil in your sight. So you are right in your verdict and justified when you judge. This fits for anything, does it not? Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Yet you desired faithfulness even in the womb. You taught me wisdom in that secret place. Cleanse me with hyssop and I will be clean. Wash me and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquity. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Don't cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. David writes, and the community sings, make me pure again on the inside. It's against you I've sinned. Can you relate to David? He longs to have purity in his heart, and that's how he wanted to live from that point on. And note this about David. I have to note this about David. He didn't let his past dictate his future, but he trusted in God for both. He didn't let his past dictate his future, but he trusted in God for both. No wonder he could write a song like this. So can you write a song or trust in God like this. This commandment, like the others, it's more than a do or a don't. It's life. It's life. It's not outdated. It's actually timeless. And it's a word for your life today. And because of what Jesus did, you too can be in the presence of this God who wants you to be a reflection of His purity. And that's what this is all about. It's all about God at the end of the day. And He says, this is how you'll look like me. And He knows us well enough to put in a command, a reminder like this. Live like this. Today, will you hear God's word spoken to you through this, through Paul? Will you hear God asking you to honor Him first in every way of your life? Whether it be in Leviticus or just this commandment, we find out God is interested in every aspect of your life, your thoughts, and your actions. And will you show God your love through your purity? It's not just about us and how we look, it's about how we reflect God and our love toward Him. Next week, Next week we're going to be remembering the events of that first Easter morning. So forward to that, being mindful of that. The following week, the 8th word of these 10 words. I just want us to know that being mindful of that, in our time, you don't even need pockets. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of weeks. We're going to stand and sing together, be mindful of what we've talked about together. I'm going to make my way to the back. If there's some way this church family can help you, we want to, this topic or anything that we've talked about this morning. Let's stand and sing together. Christ alone.